With Phainon's rerun coming up in just a few days in the second half of 4.3, today I'm here with the should you or should you not summon for him. First, we're going to be going over Phainon's spot in the meta throughout the time of his release till now, important considerations of the character, especially nowadays, and finally, reasons why you, the viewer, should or should not summon. Stuck grinding in Honkai Starl? Need stellar Jades fast? We've got you covered. Head over to U7 Buy, your ultimate gaming hub for safe, fast, and cheap in-game top-ups. Whether it's Starl or your other favorite games, U7 delivers instantly and players love it. Check out their Trustpilot reviews, they're actually top ranked. On the Honkai Starl top-up page, you can recharge your account in seconds. When you head over to the page, all you need to do is pick the pack you do want, enter your UID and server, and buy now. If you want codes and coupons to apply, be sure to create an account for proper savings. USD is a recommended usage currency for best saving. Once everything is set, you can see the savings you're about to get. Want even extra savings? Be sure to use code PRESR at checkout for 5% off. Perfect for last minute pulls or surprising a friend. Click on the link in the description, recharge fast, save more, and keep blazing those trails. So Phainon released all the way back in 3.4, now being almost exactly a year as we're one update away or one half away from 4.4. And depending how you look at it, decent amounts have changed. When it comes to his best in slot teams, not much has changed in that regard. Specific teammates for him was practically just Saridra in a sense, who was one update after him. He has gotten changes of teams with someone like Cyrene and also the Sparkle Nova Flare. Also sustained teams with Danang shortly after. And by shortly after, I mean shortly after Phainon himself. However, outside of that, there hasn't been much. The game is a lot different as opposed to then and now. Phainon had a bunch of teams you could create since he was able to just use a lot of characters, as long as they kind of formed in a way to target him so you can get into ult as soon as possible, making sure you're timing everything right to make sure the buff is active for even just a turn, because he extends it throughout the entirety of his ultimate once he goes into Kozlana. So even characters like Yukong was actually beneficial to him as long as you can manage it before going into ultimate. That was one of the biggest selling points of him, just because there was so much variety you could use, a bunch of teammates you can use. However, as time went on, that did change very quickly, and we're at a point where you kind of just want to have the set premium characters. So Sparkle Nova Flare, Saridra, those are two big ones. Cyrene works, but not always. Since there are still some variations, like you can still very much use Sunday instead of Sparkle. Instead of Cyrene, you can even have Tribi, because you don't need a full team of characters to target him, or you don't need Cyrene to instantly activate the ultimate once you get Cyrenes. There are still multiple ways to play it, but it's not as good as it was as opposed to before, where again, you could use characters like Ting Yun, you can use characters like Yukong. A lot has changed. His damage, of course, when it comes to just a pure E0, S0/E0, S1 standpoint, that has also been bad. And another big thing that's kind of held them back, which didn't matter as much, well, it did because it was still a big increase, was just how the extra turns focus on base speed. There is almost no way to really increase that. The only way is his own light cone and his E1. That's really the only way you can actually squeeze up the speed of the extra turns in his ultimate, as his light cone gives him base speed and his E1 increases the inheritance ratio of Kozlana's extra turns speed. So that was something that was a big kit flaw from the get-go, but it was of course a new unit release, and usually when a new unit releases around the time of the release, they're always going to be good in a sense. Although for Phainon, that kind of did come back to bite him very quickly. People realized that just using him with E0 S0 was kind of dying off really quick. Well, of course, there's always going to be clears in a sense that does work. That's why a lot of clears you see now is like E2 S0 minimum, because Phainon himself is the reason the phrasing E2 merchant even exists. He is like the prime E2 merchant right now, since just before that, all the performance is not great, while something at least like E0 S1 still very much can clear. The difference between having him E1 S1, E0 S1, and then even E2 S0 is just completely night and day. So while that was something to mask the beginning because he was just, you know, really strong, he was being focused, so all stuff was pointing to kind of mask the problems he would have in his base kit just because he was so strong. So E0 S0, which even on his release kind of felt a bit bad, but it was still usable. E0 S1 was fine if you had E1 only for some reason because you got unlucky maybe. That was working. And then E2 was like the, yep, I'm playing a completely different character now. Because when you look at his E2, you get an extra turn every time you consume 4 Scorch stacks of the Meteor, and also gain Res Pen in the Kozlana state. Those extra turns you were able to get, and also the Res Pen in general, was just so insane, and byproduct you had his E1 increasing extra speed, so you were able to squeeze more turns within the cycle, so you weren't just burning through AV, which is kind of a thing he does do. Phainon burns through AV so much And especially if you don't have like E1, you don't have S1, all that stuff, the AV burn just becomes so much worse. Since not only does it take longer to act, he also will just do less damage, and you can't kill enemies on the side and gain an inheritance ratio increase as opposed to having E1. So there's just a lot going against him, and that just kind of went down and down and down and made it harder and harder and harder to play him. So in a state, when it comes to baseline investment, at E0 and E0S1, it's not the greatest anymore, unfortunately. But at E2 standpoints, he's still holding up insanely strong. At E2, he is still probably one of the best DPSs in the game, just because of how much that E2 does for him, and then the byproduct of having E1 and probably S1 at the same time. And then this little section, the important thing to consider, this guy is quite literally, I've already mentioned this, but he's an E2 merchant. As much as you want to deny it or not, if you play him with and without the E2, it is just completely different of a character. Those extra turns, as I mentioned, the physical res pen, all that stuff is just such a big difference. Genuinely using him at E0 or something, just in my opinion, nowadays especially, and especially if you have like not much vertical in your supports, like let's say you're just running E0 Ceridra, E0 Sparkle, that's all. I don't even know. If you're running like Sunday in that slot or something, still doesn't really matter what the option is, but like just genuinely using him like that, especially if you use the sustain, because Phainon's also like a very big sustainless character. It's just, it doesn't feel good. I will be honest, it just no longer feels good. It just feels bad. Burns through AV so quickly, going through the next cycles, and just doesn't do the damage to really warrant how much AV you're burning. So something to very much consider is that this man's E2. Like that E2 is like where the character is finally unlocked. It's been like that, but it just wasn't as big of a deal, but it became more and more and more by the first rerun, and now especially by the second rerun, it's something you really just want to have. Finally, reasons why you should or should not summon. So the first thing I want to get off right the way for summoning is if you own and use Phainon in any way, shape, or form, I highly advise you to pull E2. If you're at E0 S0, go for E2 S0 at least. If you have his Lycone, great, go for E2. Literally in any case, which even with the vertical investment part we're gonna have right after this, you can already get the answer. There is no investment better for Phainon than his E2. You could have E1, E4, and E6 without his E2 active, and it still would probably feel bad. That E2 is really the real E6, to be honest. Again, that's where this character fully becomes unlocked. While yes, as I mentioned multiple times, you are able to find ways to clear this, especially if your supports have investment. However, Phainon himself really wants that E2. It is just a major increase to all the damage he's doing, especially with all the extra turns you can get. So if you own him in any way, shape, or form and want to or do actively use him, then definitely pull him so you can get closer to that E2. And if you want to pull him in general, I'd only really recommend it if you have the funds to at least snag E2 S0. Yes, his S1 is an insane increase, but E2 is just so much more. As long as you can function it to get to E2 S0, you will have a DPS that is very strong. Again, Phainon at E2 is one of, if not, I'm not going to say the strongest. He's not the strongest DPS anymore, but he is one of the strongest DPSs with E2. Again, with the E2. I have to specify that every time. And of course, the main consideration is always if you are in fact need of a DPS. I don't know why I said need of a DPS, in need of a DPS, because you don't want to end up pulling a DPS when you already don't have one. Maybe those teammates are already being used by others, which is another thing to be considering. You want to make sure you have some of the teammates, mainly Ceridra. Ceridra is always just good to have for the one option because she's really just on every team he's on. You want to make sure you have those team options available. So if you have Ceridra on your account, maybe you pull her for someone else like Anaxa, or you pulled her on the rerun for like the Zayla double flare, so on and so forth. As long as you have her, that's going to be a good team slot for Phainon. And you want to make sure you have a higher end team, especially if you're for some reason pulling and not going for the E2. Then you want to make sure you have the right stuff like Sparkle Nova Flare, Ceridra herself, so on and so forth. So if you have those teammates ready, then he's going to be a good consideration. But all this comes into mind of being able to pull for the E2. If you have him and you can't go for the E2, which now brings us to the should you not summon part, don't invest if you don't have the funds to take him to E2, pretty much. That's really it. If you don't have him, if you have him, but you just cannot go to E2, maybe you just don't have the currency, or you have the currency, but you want to save it for some summons on Cyrene, or if you want to save it for the summons in 4.4 and the Fate collab, then of course, not really going for Phainon is just going to be better. If he's already on your account, then it kind of is what it is. But this wouldn't really apply to you because if you're watching this video and you already own him, then you would be getting the decision of like, oh, if I should pull him, go for E2. That's kind of it. But it's mainly for the people that are wondering if they should actually get him as a character. If you want to get him for your usage, I don't recommend it if you cannot go to E2 S0 minimum. Again, that's really it. And also, if you already have enough DPSs. Same thing as applies to the opposite version of what I said in the should you summon. For the people that should, if you already have enough DPSs and your teams are set, then then you don't really have a need for another one, especially one that takes a good amount of investment to get really going. And finally, for the vertical investment priority, if it was not obvious already from how many times I've said it in the video, you go for E1, you go for E2. That is where you want to go, no questions. There's no situation where you'd go for light cone instead, or E1 S1 or anything. You want to go E2 S0 before getting his light cone. So you pull Phainon, you get E1 because you have to get it to E2, and then you get E2, then you can do whatever else. Well, by whatever else, pull the light cone. Then if you want to go past that, then that's up to you, which in that case you probably wouldn't be watching this video. So again, vertical investment priority, you want to go for E2 before anything. That E2 is going to be the biggest increase you can get on his teams. It is still a very broken dupe, and it's what makes him a very, very strong DPS. Without it, it's a lot harder to use him, especially nowadays. So go for E2, then get his icon, then you have a very, very, very strong character to use, and that's how you would go about investing in it. That is it for the should you summon for Phainon. I know it sounds like I'm kind of dogging on his performance at non-E2, which I kind of am. He's just not really a character that should be worth it if you can't go for the E2. Especially now when there's so many better options. But if you like the guy and you're willing to go to E2, or you have him and you want to push it for E2 and you're wondering if it's still worth it, in that case, then yes, that's pretty much what I'm saying. At E2, he's still very, very strong. But I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all the types of style content. And I'll see you later. Peace out.